Today we will talk about XRP and XLM and how they are still so incredibly interconnected. They are also playing an important role in turning the flywheel of adoption in the traditional financial system.
Framework. Let's think of the old industrial flywheels that take a lot of energy to make a half turn and a full turn. But once they start turning, there's momentum and it's hard to stop them. So let's overlay adoption of blockchain and digital assets. They've proven value. So part of the first turn, feasibility, certainly. And now we're seeing these use cases get into the bottom of that first turn, economic viability. And there's some exciting initiatives we heard about at Cybos around interbank payments, delivery versus payments, for example, correspondent banking, messaging, cross-border, interbank, intrabank, intracompany, and importantly, when we get to the ESG, the S part, remittances. So lots of interesting energy there. And we're seeing cryptocurrencies like XRP, Stellar Lumens, and stablecoins like USDC playing an important role in getting that wheel to turn and deliver the internet of value.
A lot of what she called out as the examples of adoption are things that I have speculated on and I have explained the possibilities of in relation to the connections between XRP and XLM. And it's interesting because in my last video about Russia, XRP, and ESDRs, I came across how they are talking about a two-tier retail model in which tier one is the central bank and tier two are financial institutions. Now, I haven't really talked about this one yet, but I do have some information compiled on it. The BIS have completed a retail CBDC technology prototype that also talks about a two-tier CBDC for retail tokens. Project Aurum is designed to prevent overissuance and to be flexible in different CBDC platforms. It created a technology stack comprised of wholesale interbank systems and retail e-wallet systems in order to establish two different types of tokens, an intermediated CBDC and stablecoins backed by CBDCs in the interbank system. Intermediated CBDCs are a direct liability of a central bank. A CBDC backed stablecoins are liabilities of the issuing bank with its assets held by the central bank. That sounds a lot like what Russia is explaining here. And with all of the ties into XRP and the IMF, it sounds as if the two-tier CBDC is actually happening. And that again comes back to my speculation on the application of the interconnections in between XRP and XLM and some of the other crypto assets and the companies that are tied into them. So I predominantly have XRP called out as private facing, where it is concentrating more on the large scale institutions, and XLM concentrating more on the retail end of things with CBDCs that essentially reflect the same amount of cash, but each of the assets in total would have to equal that same amount in order to reflect how much value is actually within the system overall. Ripple and Stellar are the only crypto companies that have DLT applications to enhance correspondent institutional infrastructures, and each of them are directly called out in ISO 20022 technical documentation as part of SWIFT's interoperability strategy to integrate blockchain platforms. And right here, it actually calls out Ripple and Stellar. And it's also interesting on her other comment that came after XRP and XLM was talking about stablecoins. And regulated stablecoins will be mainstream in 6 to 12 months. Stablecoins will be mainstream within the next year because they are furthest along in terms of cross-jurisdictional alignment, which therefore would point to even more cross-border and inter-institutional ties. And when we talk about XRP, XLM, and stablecoins, one of the largest examples of the interconnections, which I have explained much more on in the past at several points, especially with its ties into XLM and Stellar, is USDC and Circle. Here we have Ripple and Circle called out as re-architecting the financial system. And you also have each of them partnering up to host 2 public-private roundtables concentrating on regulations around DeFi. So I won't go into this a lot in this piece of content because it's a pretty complicated topic in and of itself, and I'm not a huge tech expert. In fact, I'm not one. So I have more information on this. I am trying to organize it more, but Ripple and Stellar are interoperable, which further calls back into the idea that each of them will be involved in touching the same amount of value within a financial institution or financial institutions. And probably the largest point that I will make here is that Stellar and Ripple each support the ILP, which is a protocol to complete transactions across different ledgers and payment networks. So I do want to talk more about stablecoins here. And with the MiCA regulations that are being further established, it requires one-to-one reserves and restricts algorithmic stablecoins. You've got Ripple, Stellar, and Circle who offer these kinds of products, and they meet all of those requirements, unlike USDT. And it really does look like Ripple and Stellar are establishing themselves as predominant players in the stablecoin space, especially because of their combined amount of ties into institutions. Not to forget that they are both incredibly interconnected as is and have a extremely extensive history. I haven't talked about RLUSD a lot because I've not been incredibly active and because I've been wanting to try to understand it more first before I begin to spout off on it. So, Mr. Mann has put out a lot of information on how it looks as if RLUSD is primarily designed to end up as a wholesale stablecoin, which would also tie back into what I have expressed, that the XRPL and its products are more intended for the private large-scale institutions. A wholesale stablecoin is not intended for you and I. There will be other stablecoins by Ripple, and they'll also be wholesale because their target audience is institutions, not us. And I do largely agree with that statement. And that's not to say that there won't be any retail-oriented stablecoins on there. However, if there are, and as that expands, it'll likely be in order to tie in with the institutional wholesale end of things as a technology stack, as was called out in Project Aurum and in the 2-tier Russian concept as well. Wholesale stablecoins are primarily intended for use with institutions and large corporations, while retail stablecoins are intended for use with individual consumers and smaller corporations. The key differences include a fixed versus variable exchange rate. Wholesale stablecoins typically have a fixed exchange rate, while retail stablecoins often have a variable exchange rate that changes around pegged value. Here are some interesting comments that tie into Ripple and wholesale institutional applications and involvement.
So I know there was a lot of talk, at least initially, of some of these central bank digital currencies being spun up on platforms like the Ripple infrastructure.
Yeah, so with regards to CBDCs and Ripple, it has been mentioned that there's somewhere between 20 to 30, I would say, governments or central banks that they've been speaking to in relation to proof of concepts, developing. They've already got someone said that they've done. Palau is a country, a small country, which uses the US dollar as its stablecoin, and they've got a CBDC going at the moment. By all accounts, that's quite successful to their needs, being a very small population, and they had a situation where they would loan to each other on the island, and this allows lending products. Again, we've gone back to DeFi, but even the product, they're allowing decentralized lending products using this stablecoin within their small country. But how does that play out on the bigger scale like the world? Well, yes, Ripple are looking to develop the CBDCs. The RLUSD could move on those rails between the central banks. And I think it's probably important at this point to let people know is that the CBDCs have two potential components, one being a wholesale side and one being a retail side. Now, with the wholesale side, that's central banks talking to central banks, sending money between themselves. Now, whether that is in the form of an RLUSD to a Ethereum-based yen to a something other based pound, the XRP ledger is very good at moving value from whatever form to another value of whatever form. It doesn't really matter. So if it is a CBDC or if it is a stable coin or if it is anything else of value, the XRP ledger is extremely good at that. So yes, it could be CBDCs. Is it limited to just CBDCs? No. I think it's going to be quite broad in what it can do in moving that value. And with regards to their tech, they look to they look to try and do the cheapest. Used to be multi-hop was what it was called. They look to do the very cheapest way in which we can get this value to that side of the world. And if it means going through Bitcoin because of liquidity and then back into a Great British Pound and then into a Ripple Euro, they will find a path. And all of that runs on the XRPL, the ledger itself, which could increase volume. So it's not specific, it has to be this and it has to be that. It will source out the most efficient, cheapest pathway possible.
That is also how Stellar operates. People seem to be unfamiliar with the term wholesale stablecoin. It means that it's not for you or I. It will be within a RTGS, so it's not for retail, as first discussed by the Bank of England. RippleNet caters to institutions, so RLUSD will serve as one such stablecoin within their RTGS applications. And here is what RippleNet's ecosystem looks like when it's completed with stablecoins. And this begins to explain how you can have pathways that make the most sense in terms of cost effectiveness that can go across different paths. Stablecoins will be rolled out before CBDCs because stablecoins are already regulated in a lot of countries. Now, I'm not a big crypto Airy fan. I've also explained a couple of other things that I don't agree with her on, primarily involving R3, Corda, XRP, and XDC. That said, this post about Project PAX is talking about a Swift integrated cross-border payment solution with stablecoins planned to be commercialized in 2025 with Hyperledger involvement, which connect into XRP and XLM again. And here's an interesting exchange where Mr. Mann concentrated on how the RLUSD will likely end up as a wholesale stablecoin, which was actually in response to her. So her view is that it is for users, which are you and I. Users are anyone on the XRPL. And if we know that the XRPL is primarily intended for an institutional audience, then those institutions would be the users. So I don't really understand the interpretation of that word here, other than to align with her own opinions, which is okay. I just don't happen to agree with a lot of those. So this guy tagged Mr. Mann because he was referring to how his comments refute hers, because it appears as if it will be more of a wholesale application, where he goes on to re-explain his points. NerdyX also replied to that same comment by David Schwartz, and instead also interpret it in a wholesale stablecoin way, with a native token registered and cleared as a currency, commodity, and a global stablecoin. Here are some comments that tie back into Project Pax in the Swift involvement, which again point more towards a wholesale application than a retail application. As we can see here, Ripple's CBDC private ledger allows central banks to issue digital currencies. On this platform, XRP is used as a bridge to move one form of value into another, which again goes into that multi-hop payment path. And once again, XRP is called out as an SDR based stablecoin.